Welcome to the Three Martini Lunch. Grab a stool next to Greg Columbus of Radio America and Jim Garrity of National Review. Three Martinis coming up.
So glad you're with us for the Tuesday edition of the Three Martini Lunch. We do have a good martini today. We've also got a couple of bad ones, one related to domestic electoral politics and another, a very predictable bad martini. 4 years in the making nearly, but we'll get to that a little bit later. Turns out that the Taliban is still doing business with terrorists, and you're not going to be happy with what type of business they're doing with these terrorists. But Jim, let's start overseas. And as you have laid out many times, the tariffs against China make the most sense from the Trump administration. And it looks like those tariffs are having a significant impact. New York Times and New York Post reporting on this. New York Times saying that 3 weeks into a trade war that pushed import tariffs on China-made goods to 145%, an official report on manufacturing activity signaled that in April, Chinese factories experienced the sharpest monthly slowdown in more than a year. Zhixun Huang, a China economist at Capital Economics, said in a note to clients that the data suggests that China's economy is coming under pressure as external demand cools. In a research report on Tuesday, Nomura Securities said that if Chinese exports to the United States dropped 50%, 5.7 million people in China could lose their jobs immediately. That number could grow to 15.8 million workers once the long-term effects rippled through the economy. There's a lot of companies that are no longer exporting to the United States because of the tariffs, and now they've got massive inventories on hand, so they're trying to sell them domestically. But the Chinese people can't pay the prices that Americans pay. And so there's a giant price war going on right now in which these companies will be making far, far less than they would have under the previous circumstances. And so there, according to the New York Post, there are factory workers who are furious. They're taking to the streets demanding back pay. And so unrest is already growing over in China. So, Jim, we know they've got a lot of people there. We know they've got a little bit of backup in terms of how much they can absorb here, but it appears that the punch is already pretty fierce.
So before I get rolling into this answer, I would like listeners to note that, Greg, your pronunciation of that Chinese official, his name, is why you are a radio professional and I am not. My understanding is that over at the National Review Plus Facebook group, they have a running thread on times I mispronounce words or when Rich does. So good for Greg for always knowing how to pronounce these names. I would also note the New York Post is getting this information from Radio Free Asia. That is one of the U.S. government-funded international media organizations. And I don't know about you guys, I kind of like having folks who are going to give news reporting that the Chinese government doesn't always like over there. I think that's actually a good thing to have, but maybe that's another discussion for another time. Look, I wrote a little bit about this on Friday in the Morning Jolt, that it was inevitable that when the U.S. at one point doubled, and I think we're now beyond doubled the existing tariffs on China, that it was going to have an impact on the Chinese economy. A huge chunk of the Chinese economy is built around selling things overseas, and in particular selling things to the U.S. market. So you started seeing, after a whole long stretch of defiance from the Chinese foreign ministry and insistence that Xi Jinping had not talked to Trump on the phone and that they were not interested and that dropping all of the tariffs was a precondition for further talks. Of course, once the U.S. would do that, that was what the whole point of the talks were. So there wouldn't be anything left to talk about. But the idea was that we did see some statements from China indicating they might be willing to talk about fentanyl. They might be, you saw a little bit of movement and nudges in this area. If they're having protests and stuff like that all across China, that is indicating that there is a much bigger deal to this and that actually they are going to feel pressure. One thing I would note is that the Chinese government saving face is a very big deal over in Chinese culture. They're not going to want to come out of negotiations admitting that they failed or admitting that they had to make a lot of concessions, which doesn't mean they're not willing to make concessions. Doesn't mean they're not willing to give ground on certain areas to get wins in other areas, i.e. getting access to the U.S. market again. But it just means they're not going to want to admit it. So I don't know whether it's Becent is handling the negotiations here, whether it's our ambassador, whether there are, God help us if it's Navarro. But someone is going to be negotiating with the Chinese. And I kind of would like to, whoever they are, recognize that the Chinese need an exit ramp. They need a way to come out saying that they have a win here. Even if our objective is to get them to lower tariffs on our stuff, get us greater access to their markets, and preferably continue the process of consciously uncoupling our economy from theirs.
This is the country that we really want to make rethink things, feel the pressure in a lot of different ways for all of their aggression and bad acting on the national security front, the economic front, the cultural front. China needs a reckoning, and this is one way to do that. So hopefully the actual Communist Chinese Party over there feels it as well. Thank you also for the compliment in pronouncing the name. I think Zhishun Wang is probably right. I got Wang from John Wang back in the Chinese fundraising scandal. But the thing I learned, Jim, during the Iraq War is that when we knocked off terrorists and Iraqi officials most people had never heard of, just say it confidently. And for the most part, who's going to know?
Dead terrorists never correct your pronunciation. That is true.
That's right. That's right. Well, Jim, it sure sounds like there's a lot of Chinese business owners who aren't quite sure what the future of their business looks like. But here we care a lot more about what your business is going to look like in the future. Some things, of course, are out of your control. Inflation, interest rates, the markets, and so forth. But for more than 38,000 businesses, they have future-proofed their operations with NetSuite by Oracle, the leading cloud ERP platform. It integrates key business functions like accounting, financial management, inventory, and HR into one seamless system.
You can gain real-time insights and forecasting to make proactive, data-driven decisions. And with actionable data at your fingertips, you can anticipate trends and respond faster to opportunities. Closing your books in days instead of weeks means you spend less time focusing on past reports and more time focusing on future growth. Allows you to shift your attention from historical tasks to strategic initiatives that will drive your business forward.
Yeah, as I've said many times, the business experts, business owners will tell you, you can't do everything anymore. You just can't. So NetSuite by Oracle is the way to go. If I needed something like this, I would certainly go with NetSuite by Oracle. And you can now download the CFO's Guide to AI and Machine Learning at netsuite.com/martini. The guide is free to you at netsuite.com/martini. That's netsuite.com/martini. All right, Jim, we're not even to the middle of 2025 yet, but we've talked a lot about 2026 because of all those Democratic retirements from Michigan to Minnesota to New Hampshire to Illinois, although we don't have much of a shot in Illinois, probably. But then there's also the democratically held seats that Republicans have a decent shot at picking up. That includes Georgia, probably front and center, where Jon Ossoff won in 2020, very frustratingly, I might add. So the big name that everyone had been hoping would run, at least most people in the Republican side, is Brian Kemp, the two-term governor, has never lost an election in Georgia, went from the state Senate to statewide office, Secretary of State, governor twice over Stacey Abrams, even though she only admits one of them. But he has decided he's not going to run for Senate. He was the only Republican in hypothetical head-to-head matchups that was leading Ossoff. Earlier in the year, it was high single digits. There was just a poll out from, I believe, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution showing that he was up by 3 in a hypothetical matchup against Ossoff as of May 1st. After Brian Kemp, it looks like if she runs, Marjorie Taylor Greene would be the likely favorite to be the Republican nominee, easily outpacing Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger. However, a Marjorie Taylor Greene versus Jon Ossoff matchup has Ossoff winning 54-37, according to Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Trafalgar has it a little bit closer, but it's still high single digits for Ossoff, who's plus 12 in favorability in Georgia. So it's not going to be that easy to take him out. And so, Jim, the map is still looking pretty good for Republicans, but Georgia, which was one of their best pickup opportunities, just got a lot more complicated.
Yeah, this one's a bummer. If Marjorie Taylor Greene really does turn out to be the Republican Senate candidate in Georgia, I'm going to need better help just to battle off the depression. So I had a chance to interview Brian Kemp at the National Review Ideas Summit, like probably about, maybe 6 weeks, 2 months ago, and asked him very specifically about this Senate race. And I joked that he was running late. And as soon as I said running, you could hear Jon Ossoff screaming all the way across the river over in Washington. Look, Kemp would have been about as close to a sure thing as you were going to find, still very popular in the state. One of the things that's fascinating, remember, he had that ongoing spat with Donald Trump. And managed to win his primary by a pretty solid margin, and has managed to, as he put it, that both in that interview and several times, he's like, Trump might have a problem with me, but I don't have a problem with him. And I think he, obviously Georgia is traditionally a Republican state, conservative by most definitions, but Kemp really managed to handle a disagreement with Trump probably better than anybody else in the country. He also has a really solid conservative record. He's term limited. Stacey Abrams is still occasionally making noises about running again. Republicans could get lucky, but I don't even know if I think Marjorie Taylor Greene against Stacey Abrams is a slam dunk. And it just is just a little frustrating. There's one of three possibilities here. One possibility is that Kemp has looked at it and says, 2026 is going to be a really rough year for Republicans. Now, we don't know if that's the case. Seems early, but that doesn't seem wildly unbelievable considering the traditional pattern in this. It might be that he's an executive and he looked at the job of senator and kind of realizes that he just wouldn't be happy there. It's not what he wants to do. And that he's just, there's no point in running if you don't want to do that. I can respect that. I get the feeling that was some of the thinking of Governor Sununu up in New Hampshire as well. And the other thing I kind of wonder is, do you have interest in running for president? And if you have interest in running for president, there's no point in running for Senate, for an election that will be held in 2026 when, the next presidential primary really is going to effectively begin in the first couple months of 2027. I would be very interested in Kemp as a presidential candidate. We'll see how things shake out. But I look back at that interview with him, and I'm kind of realized when a guy wants to be in the run for Senate, he gives off a vibe. He generates some enthusiasm. And Kemp said he was thinking about it, but the voice, the body language, nothing indicated this was something that he was really itching to do. So deeply disappointing, but I suppose not completely surprising.
Yeah, I think once you've been governor, having that executive position, being one of 100 and being amongst the most junior members, not a ton of power, even if your party is in the majority, is not as appealing as some might think. And so, the Senate largely, maybe it's a little better right now, but it's largely about appointments, judicial nominations, funding the government. You get some pieces of legislation. We've obviously got this big reconciliation bill coming up, but for the most part, in recent years, it's mostly been confirmations and funding the government. There's been a handful of legislation, but if that's not exciting to you, it's understandable why you wouldn't want to do it. But Brian Kemp was definitely the brightest pickup potential for the Senate Republicans this year in this cycle, and it's not going to happen. Today's podcast is brought to you by BetterHelp. And Jim, I can imagine there might be some folks in the Georgia Republican Party who could use BetterHelp today. Obviously, there are a lot of high hopes that Brian Kemp would run for that Senate seat. He is not. And now, like we said, the scramble is on. So BetterHelp might be the right move for them. But we should also point out that May is Mental Health Awareness Month. So if you've thought about, maybe I need to talk to someone outside of my family or my circle of friends about some of these things I've been struggling with, whether it's work or relationships or whatever it is, maybe now is the time to do that. And there's no better place to get started than with BetterHelp.
BetterHelp has more than 10 years of experience matching people with the right therapist from their diverse network of more than 30,000 licensed therapists with a wide range of specialties. BetterHelp is fully online, making therapy affordable and convenient, serving more than 5 million people worldwide. And remember, you can easily switch therapists anytime at no extra cost.
We are all better with help. So visit betterhelp.com/3ML to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/3ML. All right, Jim, on to our final martini now. I'd say this is definitely a bad one, but there's obviously crazy underlying all of it. Adam Credo over at the Free Beacon, great reporter over there, says the Taliban took in $3.4 billion in revenue over the last year, boosting its cash supply by 14%. Amid the return of Afghanistan as a central safe haven for terrorist organizations across the Middle East. Oh, but wait, there's more. How did they get that money, Jim? The repercussions of the Biden administration's disastrous 2021 military withdrawal from Afghanistan continue to reverberate across the war-torn country, with multiple al-Qaeda affiliates accessing American-supplied weapons seized from the former Afghan National Army, according to a new oversight report from the Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction. The U.S. left 78 aircraft, 40,000 military vehicles, and more than 300,000 weapons in Afghanistan in a withdrawal that saw 13 American service members lose their lives. According to the report, which the watchdog group delivered to Congress April 30th, the Taliban transferred many of these arms directly to terrorist affiliates, while others made their way onto the black market. The Pentagon assesses that of around $18.6 billion worth of U.S. equipment provided to the Afghan army over decades of support, $7.12 billion in weaponry remains in the Taliban's possession. As a result, quote, terrorist groups continue to operate in and from Afghanistan amid ongoing U.S., UN, and regional concerns that the country remains a terrorist haven. So, Jim, no surprise that the terrorists are back, feeling very, very safe in Afghanistan. And given our chaotic and incompetent withdrawal, no surprise that our own weapons could now be used to target Americans or allies or anybody else in the world.
Greg, everything you said there cannot be true, because the noted counterterrorism strategist, Jen Psaki, as she was White House press secretary, assured us many times that the U.S. has considerable leverage over the Taliban. And as listeners know, President Biden assured us that the Taliban were no longer a threat to America, and that if they got back into business of assisting terrorists, well, the U.S. had long-range strike capabilities that were going to mitigate any threat to us. Now, look, we all know that the U.S. spent a great deal of blood and treasure in Afghanistan. There were indisputable, serious problems with the existing Afghan government. The Afghan army, despite the assurances from President Biden that they were the best trained, best equipped, best armed army in the country, fell apart in the face of Taliban advances. And I completely understand why a lot of Americans might look at that entire experience and say, it really is the graveyard of empires. There's no point in helping these people. We can't help those who won't help themselves. We just want to wash our hands and be done with it and never think about Afghanistan again. I get that. In my gut, I understand that feeling. The problem is that once you stop paying attention to Afghanistan, it still exists. Everybody who's there doesn't go away. It's not, peekaboo. It's not out of sight, out of mind. And they have all those weapons. We know their worldview. We know how they see us. We know how they see the West. We know how they see infidels. What did you think they were going to do with it? Now, I haven't done a chance to update my reporting and my research as well as Adam Credo has done. But I do have a little bit of good news about the status of the Taliban Air Force. Since they took over the country, the good news is that 5 of the helicopters that were left behind have been destroyed. I'd love to give the Pentagon credit for this, or any U.S. ally, but I have to give credit to all of the Taliban pilots who have crashed 5 helicopters. Go figure. These guys who are, living in caves and absolutely rejecting all modernity. Go figure, they're not great pilots. And my hope is we can get more Afghan Taliban pilots flying those helicopters and crashing, because that's what they're good at. And honestly, the single greatest threat to the Taliban Air Force so far is the Taliban Air Force.
Over the horizon. Remember, we had over the horizon capabilities that if any hint of terrorist groups reconstituting there, or the Taliban not playing by the rules that Anthony Blinken assured us that they would play by, we can act at any time. We didn't.
As I say, the Biden administration assured us repeatedly that the U.S. threat to the Taliban was over the horizon. It turns out they didn't really need the latter 2 words.
Unfortunately, right. But who's going to pay the price for this? It's probably not going to be the top officials in the Biden administration. It's going to be other folks in the region or beyond. And that's not a good martini at all. Well, Jim, that's kind of a
depressing
really
day.
Bad martini to end the day on. Wow.
Happy Tuesday, everybody.
Definitely hoping for better news tomorrow. Jim Garrity, National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. Thanks so much for being with us today. Please be sure to subscribe to the 3 Martini Lunch. If you don't already, tell your friends about us as well. Thanks also for your 5-star ratings and your kind reviews. Please keep those coming. Get us on your home devices. All you have to say is play 3 Martini Lunch podcast. Follow us both on X. He's at Jim Garrity. I'm at Greg Corombos. Have a great Tuesday and join us again Wednesday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.